Fake HOA banned my security lights. Judge ordered them reinstalled. Karen Thompson stood on the manicured lawn of Willow Creek Estates, her arms crossed, her lips pursed in a tight line. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pristine neighborhood, where every house gleamed with curated perfection. But Karen's gaze was fixed on the new house at 47 Maple Drive, where a set of glaringly bright security lights had just been installed. To her, they were an abomination, a blight on the aesthetic harmony she'd spent years cultivating as president of the Homeowners Association. "Who do these people think they are?" she muttered to herself, adjusting her sunglasses. The Carters had moved in barely a week ago, and already they were causing trouble. Karen had heard rumors, whispers from neighbors about the family's suspicious late-night arrivals and their reluctance to attend the HOA's welcome brunch. She didn't trust them. People who installed garish floodlights without permission were clearly up to no good. Karen marched to her SUV, her heels clicking on the pavement, and drove straight to the HOA office. By evening, she drafted a formal notice citing violation of aesthetic standards and demanding the light's immediate removal. She didn't bother consulting the board. Karen's word was law in Willow Creek. The notice was delivered to the Carters' doorstep by 8 p.m. The next morning, Karen was sipping her coffee when her phone buzzed with a text from Linda, her nosy but loyal neighbor. "You won't believe this. The Carters are refusing to take down those lights. They're calling an emergency HOA meeting." Karen's blood boiled. "Refusing?" she scoffed, slamming her mug down. "We'll see about that." The meeting was held in the community center, a sleek building Karen had personally overseen the renovation of. The room was packed with residents, their murmurs filling the air like static. At the front, Karen stood tall, her blazer crisp, her expression one of righteous indignation. Across from her sat the Carters, James, a quiet man with tired eyes, his wife Maria, who clutched a folder of documents, and their daughter Sophie, a shy 10-year-old who fidgeted nervously. James spoke first, his voice steady but strained. "We installed those lights for safety. Our old neighborhood had break-ins, and we want to protect our daughter. We didn't know we needed approval, but we're happy to discuss." "Discuss?" Karen cut him off, her tone dripping with disdain. "You didn't bother to read the HOA bylaws, Mr. Carter. Those lights are an eyesore and they scream distrust. What kind of message are you sending? That Willow Creek isn't safe." The room erupted in whispers. Some nodded in agreement with Karen. Others shifted uncomfortably. Maria stood, her hands trembling, but her voice firm. "We're not trying to cause trouble. Sophie has nightmares about burglars. Those lights make her feel safe. Please, just let us keep them." Karen smirked, unmoved. "This isn't about feelings. It's about standards. If we let everyone do whatever they want, this neighborhood will look like a circus. The lights come down, or you'll face fines." The meeting ended with a vote. Karen's influence held sway, and the board upheld the ban. The Carters left in silence, Sophie clinging to her mother's hand. Karen felt a surge of triumph. Order had been restored, but order didn't last. 2 weeks later, Karen was jolted awake at 3 a.m. by sirens. Red and blue lights flashed outside her window. She threw on a robe and stepped outside, where neighbors were already gathering, their faces pale. "It's the Carters' house," Linda whispered, her voice shaking. "Someone broke in." Karen's stomach dropped. She pushed through the crowd, her heart pounding. Police cars lined the street, their radios crackling. An ambulance was parked in the Carters' driveway. As Karen neared, she saw Maria sobbing on the porch, James holding her tightly, and then she saw Sophie carried out on a stretcher, her arm bloodied, her face pale with fear. "What happened?" Karen asked, her voice barely a whisper. A neighbor turned to her, eyes blazing. "A burglar smashed a window." Sophie heard the noise and tried to run, but she fell down the stairs. "She's hurt, Karen. And those damn lights you banned? They might have stopped this." The words hit Karen like a slap. She stood frozen as the ambulance sped away, its siren fading into the night. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, angrier. "This is on the HOA," someone shouted. "On you, Karen." Karen stumbled back to her house, her mind reeling. She tried to tell herself it wasn't her fault. The Carters should have followed the rules. They should have installed an alarm system instead. But the image of Sophie's terrified face burned in her mind, and for the first time, Karen felt a crack in her certainty. The next day, the neighborhood was a powder keg. Flyers demanding Karen's resignation appeared on every mailbox. Social media exploded with posts condemning the HOA, some calling Karen a heartless tyrant. A local news outlet picked up the story, and soon Washer Willow Creek HOA was trending. Reporters camped outside Karen's house, shouting questions about her vendetta against the Carters. Karen locked herself inside, her phone buzzing with hateful messages. She wanted to fight back, to defend her actions, but doubt gnawed at her. Had she been too quick to judge? Had her obsession with control blinded her to the Carters' needs? Then came the lawsuit. The Carters filed a case against the HOA, alleging negligence and emotional distress. Karen was named as a defendant. The news hit her like a freight train. She hired a lawyer, but the court of public opinion had already convicted her. Neighbors shunned her. Linda stopped texting. Even her own husband, Mark, looked at her with disappointment. The trial was set for 3 months later. Karen spent those months in a haze of dread, replaying every decision, every word she'd said at that HOA meeting. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. The woman who'd once strode through Willow Creek like a queen now felt like a pariah. The courtroom was suffocating, the air thick with tension and the faint hum of whispered conversations. Karen sat at the defendant's table, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Her lawyer, a stern man in a gray suit, scribbled notes beside her, but Karen barely noticed. Her eyes kept darting to the Carters, seated across the room. Maria's face was drawn, her eyes red from crying. James sat rigid, his arm around Sophie, whose arm was still in a sling. The sight of the little girl, so small and fragile, made Karen's chest ache. The trial had dragged on for days, each one peeling back another layer of Karen's carefully constructed world. Witnesses testified about the HOA's overreach. Neighbors recounted Karen's iron-fisted rule, and experts debated whether security lights could have deterred the burglar. But the most damning moment came when Maria took the stand. Maria's voice trembled as she spoke, but her words were clear, cutting through the room like a blade. "We beg for those lights, not for us, but for Sophie. She's been afraid of the dark since we moved. We thought Willow Creek was safe, but Karen Thompson decided our daughter's safety didn't matter. She judged us without knowing us. And now Sophie wakes up screaming every night, reliving that moment when a stranger broke into our home." The courtroom was silent, save for a few stifled sobs. Karen felt every eye on her, each one heavy with accusation. She wanted to shrink, to disappear, but there was nowhere to hide. When Sophie was called to testify, Karen's heart nearly stopped. The girl walked slowly to the stand, her eyes downcast, her voice barely audible. "I was scared," Sophie whispered. "I heard the glass break, and I ran. I fell down the stairs, and it hurt so bad. I thought the bad man was going to get me. If the lights were there, maybe he wouldn't have come." The judge, a stern woman with gray hair, leaned forward, her expression softening as she listened to Sophie. Karen's lawyer tried to object, arguing the testimony was speculative, but the judge silenced him with a look. When Sophie stepped down, Maria enveloped her in a hug, and the room seemed to exhale collectively. Karen's turn came next. Her lawyer had coached her to stick to the facts, the HOA bylaws, the aesthetic standards, the lack of precedent for security lights. But as she stood, her carefully rehearsed words dissolved. The weight of Sophie's testimony, Maria's pain, and the crowd's anger pressed down on her. She opened her mouth, but all that came out was a shaky, "I'm sorry." The room stirred. Her lawyer hissed for her to stick to the script, but Karen couldn't. "I thought I was protecting the neighborhood," she said, her voice cracking. "I thought I was doing the right thing. But I was wrong. I didn't listen. I didn't care enough to try." The admission hung in the air, raw and unexpected. Even the Carters looked surprised. Karen sat down, her face burning, her heart pounding. She didn't know if her words would help or hurt her case, but for the first time she felt a flicker of relief. She'd spoken the truth. The trial concluded with closing arguments, but Karen barely heard them. Her mind was elsewhere, replaying every moment that had led her here. The smugness she'd felt at the HOA meeting, the triumph of enforcing her will, the horror of seeing Sophie on that stretcher. She'd been so sure of her righteousness, so quick to assume the worst of the Carters. And now her world was unraveling. The judge delivered her verdict the next day. The courtroom was packed, the tension palpable. Karen stood, her legs trembling, as the judge's voice echoed through the room. The HOA's decision to ban the Carter's security lights was arbitrary and negligent, the judge said, her tone firm. The evidence suggests those lights could have deterred the burglary, preventing harm to a child. This court orders the immediate reinstallation of the lights and awards the Carter family compensatory damages for their emotional and physical suffering. Furthermore, Ms. Thompson, your actions as HOA president reflect a pattern of overreach. I strongly recommend the board reevaluate your leadership. The gavel fell, and the room erupted. Some cheered, others shouted in anger. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing. Karen stood frozen, the judge's words ringing in her ears. She'd lost, not just the case, but her reputation, her authority, her sense of self. As the crowd dispersed, Karen saw the Carters embrace, tears streaming down their faces. Sophie clung to her parents, a small smile breaking through her fear. The sight should have stung, but instead, it stirred something in Karen, a longing to make things right, to be better. The days that followed were a blur of humiliation. The HOA board voted to remove Karen as president, a decision plastered across local news. Neighbors avoided her, their silence louder than any insult. Karen's husband, Mark, tried to support her, but even he couldn't hide his frustration. "You brought this on yourself, Karen," he said one night, his voice heavy. "You didn't have to be so harsh." Alone in her house, Karen began to unravel the person she'd become. She'd always prided herself on her control, her ability to shape Willow Creek into her vision of perfection. But what had that cost? She'd alienated her neighbors, hurt a child, and lost the respect of everyone she knew. The realization was a knife to her heart, but it was also a strange kind of liberation. If she'd been wrong about so much, maybe she could change. One evening, driven by a mix of guilt and desperation, Karen drove to the Carters' house. The security lights were back up, casting a soft glow over the lawn. She sat in her car for nearly an hour, rehearsing what she'd say, before finally knocking on the door. Maria answered, her expression wary. "What do you want, Karen?" "I need to talk," Karen said, her voice trembling. "Please, I owe you that much." Maria hesitated, then stepped aside. Inside, the house was warm, filled with the scent of dinner and the soft hum of a TV. Sophie sat on the couch coloring, her arm still in a sling. She looked up at Karen, her eyes wide but not afraid. Karen took a deep breath. "I'm here to apologize, not just for the lights, but for everything. I judged you without knowing you. I let my pride get in the way of your safety, and I'll never forgive myself for what happened to Sophie." Maria's eyes softened, but her voice was firm. "Words don't erase the pain, Karen. Sophie's still scared. We're still picking up the pieces." "I know," Karen said, tears welling. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I want to make things right, whatever it takes." James joined them, his expression guarded. "Why now?" he asked. "Because you lost?" Karen shook her head. "Because I was wrong. I've spent my life thinking I knew best, but I didn't see you, your family, your fears, your needs. I want to learn. I want to be better." The room was quiet, the weight of Karen's words settling over them. Sophie looked up from her coloring, her voice small. "Do you mean it?" Karen met her gaze, her heart breaking. "I do, Sophie. I promise." Sophie's question lingered in the air, simple yet piercing. Karen felt the weight of it, the sincerity in the girl's wide eyes demanding an answer that went beyond words. She knelt to Sophie's level, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "I mean it, Sophie. I've made mistakes, big ones. But I want to do better, for you and for everyone." Maria and James exchanged a glance, their expressions softening but still guarded. Maria spoke, her voice quieter now. "We appreciate the apology, Karen, but trust is earned, not given. What happened? It's not something we can just forget." "I understand," Karen said, standing. "I don't expect you to trust me yet, but I'm going to try, every day, to show you I've changed. Thank you for letting me say this." As Karen drove home, the Carters' words echoed in her mind. Trust is earned. She'd spent years demanding respect without giving it, assuming her authority made her infallible. Now, stripped of that power, she felt both lost and strangely free. For the first time, she wanted to build something real. Not a perfect neighborhood, but a community where people felt safe, heard, and valued. The next morning, Karen began. She started small, attending the next HOA meeting as a regular member, not a leader. The room fell silent when she walked in, eyes narrowing with suspicion. She took a deep breath and raised her hand to speak. "I owe everyone here an apology," she said, her voice clear. "I let power go to my head. I made decisions without listening, and I hurt people, especially the Carters. I'm stepping back from any leadership role, but I want to help rebuild what I broke, if you'll let me." The response was mixed. Some scoffed, others nodded cautiously. Linda, her former ally, stood and said, "You've got a lot to prove, Karen, but I'm willing to see if you mean it." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. Karen threw herself into action. She volunteered to revise the HOA bylaws, advocating for clearer rules on safety measures like security lights. She reached out to neighbors, not to lecture, but to listen, asking what they needed to feel secure. Some slammed doors in her face, but others invited her in, sharing stories of their own fears and frustrations. Karen took notes, her old arrogance replaced by a quiet determination to understand. She also began visiting the Carters regularly, not to push for forgiveness, but to show consistency. She brought homemade cookies, offered to help with yard work, and asked Sophie about her drawings. At first, the visits were awkward, but over time, Sophie's shy smiles grew brighter. One day, she handed Karen a drawing of a house with glowing lights. "This is our house now," Sophie said. "It feels safer." Karen framed the drawing and hung it in her living room, a daily reminder of why she was doing this. The Carters never fully embraced her, and Karen didn't expect them to. But their willingness to let her try was enough. The neighborhood began to change. The new HOA board, inspired by the Carters' case, approved funding for community safety initiatives, motion sensor lights, neighborhood watch programs, even a free self-defense class. Karen attended every event, not as a leader, but as a participant, learning alongside her neighbors. She noticed small shifts, people waving to her on the street, conversations that didn't end in glares. It wasn't redemption, but it was progress. 6 months after the trial, Willow Creek held a community fair, a chance to celebrate the neighborhood's resilience. Karen hesitated to attend, fearing she'd be unwelcome. But Maria called her the night before. "Sophie wants you there," she said simply. "She's been practicing a speech." Karen arrived at the fair with a knot in her stomach. The park was alive with laughter, music, and the smell of grilled food. She spotted the Carters near a small stage, where Sophie stood, holding a microphone. The crowd hushed as Sophie began to speak, her voice stronger than Karen had ever heard. "I was scared for a long time," Sophie said, clutching a piece of paper. "When our house got broken into, I thought I'd never feel safe again. But my parents fought for me, and so did a lot of you. Even Ms. Karen, she made a mistake, but she's trying to fix it. I'm not scared anymore, because I know we're all looking out for each other now." The crowd applauded, and Karen's eyes filled with tears. Sophie's words weren't absolution, but they were a gift, a recognition of her effort, however imperfect. After the speech, Sophie ran to Karen, holding out a small bracelet made of colorful beads. "I made this for you," she said. "It's to say thank you for helping." Karen slipped the bracelet on, her throat tight. "Thank you, Sophie, for giving me a chance." As the fair continued, Karen stood on the sidelines watching families laugh and connect. She thought of the woman she'd been a year ago, proud, controlling, blind to the people around her. That Karen had died in the courtroom, replaced by someone still learning, still flawed, but striving for something better. She'd lost her throne, but she'd gained something far more valuable, a sense of purpose rooted in kindness, honor, and gratitude. The sun set over Willow Creek, casting a warm glow over the park. Karen's phone buzzed with a text from Linda. "You did good today. Keep it up." She smiled, a quiet hope settling in her chest. The road ahead was long, and she'd carry the weight of her mistakes forever. But for the first time, she felt ready to walk it. Not as a queen, but as a neighbor, a learner, a person who cared. In the weeks that followed, Karen continued her work, speaking at community forums about the importance of listening and balancing rules with compassion. She never sought leadership again, content to support from the background. The Carters invited her to Sophie's birthday party, a small gesture that felt like a milestone. As she watched Sophie blow out her candles, surrounded by love, Karen made a silent vow to honor the lessons she'd learned, to be grateful for second chances, and to never again let pride blind her to the humanity of others. Willow Creek wasn't perfect, but it was healing, and so was Karen. The end.